Formal cases. Formal cases are not about external impediments necessarily, like paperwork or status, but more about the quality of your consent to the marriage. Remember, consent makes marriage. So a defective consent renders a marriage invalid. Marital consent has essential requirements that must be met for marriage to be valid. If one of these requirements is lacking, the consent is defective, and therefore the marriage is invalid. All right. Now, these reasons for invalidity or defective consent are what we call the grounds of marital nullity. The grounds of nullity. And they have to do with things like grave lack of discretionary judgment regarding the essential rights and duties of marriage, the psychic-natured incapacity to assume marital obligations, force, fear, present condition, future condition, past condition, conditional consent in any way, willful exclusion of the goods of marriage or willful exclusion of marriage itself, right? These are the grounds for why your declaration before God and your community would be considered invalid, a defective consent. And they basically boil down to well, I could not do it, right? I could not do it. See, these incapacity grounds. I could not because I didn't have proper use of my reason. I could not because I had such a grave lack of discretionary judgment I couldn't really discern what marriage was so as to choose it. I had a psychic-natured incapacity to even fulfill what I was saying with great zeal. I was incapable of making and carrying out marriage vows. Or there's some things where if I had known better, I would not have. Okay? And if it was something that, especially things like fraud, somebody concealed a very important piece of information that would have led to me saying, no, I don't want to marry you. All right? I would not have married you had I known this. And now that I found out I know it, I'm gone. Okay? For instance. And then there's some that grounds that say, well, I didn't marry you. I might have said it. These are the so-called simulation grounds, right? The grounds that are based on willful exclusions of things. The prime example of a willful exclusion of marriage itself is the case where, let's say, a person wants to gain citizenship in a country, and they find a willing person to get married with them for the purpose of giving them citizenship. And as soon as the paperwork is done and they are citizens of that new country, that they leave that marriage, get divorced, well, we say, well, their object was obviously not the mutual care and respect, the life and love and all the things that marriage requires. Their object in their consent to the marriage was to obtain a civil status in a country. That would be a total willful exclusion of marriage. Another would be the partial exclusions or partial simulation. This is where someone excludes a particular, one good or another of marriage. Permanence, children, procreative capacity, or fidelity, right? This is the case, fidelity, for instance, of, the man who has a concubine that he has no intention of putting away when he gets married, and that relationship continues. Well, you have willfully excluded, fidelity in your marriage to your spouse. Exclusion of children. Someone who gets married with the express intention of never having children. I don't want children. I want the companionship of marriage, but I don't want the children that come from marriage. Well, that's not marriage as we understand it. Marriage includes an openness to children. That's the point of it, the purpose of it. Well, if you can prove that, that would be a willful exclusion of children. And then permanence. Well, I'm not going to stay married forever. This is just a temporary gig. If you can prove that that was the intention, either explicit or implicit, then that's a declaration of nullity waiting to happen. Okay. So there are various grounds of marriage nullity. Your case sponsor will have a book that looks very similar to this. They will be aiding you. Your case sponsor is either your parish priest, your deacon, or a trained layperson that will assist you in making your petition, and they will pull out a book that looks very similar to this, and they will walk you through all the processes. But there is a page in here called Determining Grounds of Marital Nullity. And it has all of the grounds that are admitted by the tribunal. There's 2 pages worth. Okay? And these are the things that you need to read through to see if any of these match your case, if you are dealing with a defective consent formal case. Right? So a psychic-natured incapacity. At the time of your marriage, you or your spouse suffered from a debilitating psychological or emotional condition that made it impossible to fulfill the normal obligations of marriage. Grave lack of discretionary judgment. At the time of your marriage, you or your spouse was affected by some circumstance or factor that seriously impaired your ability to understand and evaluate your decision to marry and your ability to create a true marital relationship with each other, for instance. Now notice in those things we have 2 sides to this. It takes 2 to tango, doesn't it? You can argue on your own, I was defective in my consent, but it could be the case that your former spouse was defective in his or her consent. You have to prove that, bring the evidence, have the witnesses, okay? But there are 2 sides to every coin, and this is no exception.